All right, there was a school shooting in Florida once again, and here we are, Second Amendment killing us again. So why can't we do something about this? I'm pointing fingers at the Second Amendment like it's a magic switch that once flipped it would stop the violence, but that's not reality. If you massively alter the Second Amendment tomorrow, you're not addressing the cultural, psychological enforcement failures that lead to school shootings. Guns are part of it, but they're just tools. I mean, yeah. The deeper rot is mental health. Yeah, I mean, I get that. I mean, isn't there an argument that society should only be allowed certain rights according to their level of responsibility? Like, I'm not allowed to have a nuclear weapon because obviously we don't trust even a single individual. Even the president has to go through some protocols before launching nuclear weapons. We've already agreed as a society that you can only trust people with tools that they're ready to be responsible for. We don't trust 18-year-olds to drink alcohol in a lot of states. So how could we trust people to have just weapons if we have clearly shown that we are not capable of being responsible for these tools? Even if you could restrict access based on perceived readiness, who gets to define what is responsible? The government? Yeah, why not? They define everything else. Let's not forget, even if we ban guns tomorrow, there are more guns than people in the US. That genie's out of the bottle. Okay, here's my argument for that, though. When the Cold War was at its pinnacle, when JFK, we were this close to nuclear Armageddon, what made the world feel safer? We agreed to de-arm ourselves, to reduce our armaments. So we agree that nuclear weapons is just better if there's less of them in the world, and that saved us from basically complete annihilation. So how could the gun argument be the opposite? Where, do you honestly tell me if the gun argument was true, where it's better if more people have guns, wouldn't that follow where it would have been better if the whole world just had nukes? Nukes are weapons of deterrence. They're political tools, not personal defense items. You don't use them in self-defense against a burglar. That's not part of daily civilian life. Okay. Wouldn't fewer guns make us safer, just like fewer nukes? Not necessarily, because you're ignoring scale, context, and human element. Nuke is only one purpose, mass destruction. Guns serve many purposes. Self-defense, sport, hunting, a hedge against tyranny. Okay. You're wrong, because we developed nuclear weapons, the Manhattan Project, because we thought the Germans were going to develop it first. So the whole purpose was self-defense. Our entire government's argument for why we had to hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki was because more people would have died from a land invasion. And so it was used to defend ourselves. So you can always spin it either way, that it's for self-defense. And the Second Amendment doesn't say anything about hunting or sport. It talks about the right to bear arms, the right for us to bear arms in the context that militias are necessary to preserve a free state. It doesn't say how it does that, whether that's to actually use them or as a deterrent. But seeing as though nuclear weapons have been used, they are clearly more than a deterrent if there's a history of them ending a war. You're conflating state-level decisions made during a world war with personal ownership rights enshrined in peacetime constitution. I would take issue with that. Second Amendment isn't about international warfare. It's about domestic power dynamics. It exists because the founders didn't trust standing armies or governments with unchecked force. It's not guns are good because nukes are bad. It's individuals must retain the means to resist oppression. That's the philosophical bedrock. What happens, however, if the weapons themselves become the tyranny? In our Declaration of Independence, we say we need life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But here's the thing, it's not just those three things. In my opinion, it's those three things in that order. You need life to have liberty. You need liberty in order to pursue happiness. It's hard for a slave to pursue happiness, so they need freedom, they need liberty. And it's especially hard for anybody to have freedom or liberty if they're just dead. If we're going to talk about weapons as tyranny, we have to be honest that the flip side is true too. Monopoly on force, whether by governments or leased, is tyranny in the eyes of those who feel powerless. That's the tension. Let's not pretend this is only philosophical. You ban guns in a country like the US, you don't suddenly protect lives. You drive weapons underground, create a black market, and most importantly, you stoke resentment and rebellion among millions who see that act not as life-saving but life-threatening. So your life, liberty, pursuit of happiness argument sounds good and it's grounded in deep American ideals, but it's not a trump card. That's an ironic statement. It's a values debate. Values don't bend just because something is tragic. They bend. Okay, even if I agree with some of what you're saying, there must be a tipping point which the danger outweighs the probative value of possessing the tool. We don't let people drive without a driver's license, and guns are specifically an instrument of death. There has to be some point, let's put it this way. In all things, there has to be some point where the threat of death of random gun violence starts to outweigh its value as a quote-unquote defensive tool. Question is, what's your number? If there's a 50% chance any of us go outside and get shot, I think your argument falls apart. Right now, I think the Second Amendment argument might only sort of work because it's statistical anomaly, let's say, at the moment, that you go outside and get killed. But surely there's a tipping point where that will change, or that could change. So the question is, what is your tipping point? When is it finally not okay for us to, when does the risk versus reward ratio start to change for you? You're right, everything is a tipping point. Even constitutional rights aren't absolute. Free speech doesn't protect inciting violence. The Fourth Amendment doesn't stop the government from searching your house if they have a warrant or probable cause, okay? So yeah, at some point the right to bear arms could be so dangerous that it undermines the very life it's supposedly protecting. But here's where I push back. The people who support strong gun rights don't believe we're anywhere near that tipping point. To them, the random violence you're citing isn't random, it's isolated. Tied to failures in mental health systems, community breakdown, or criminal justice enforcement. You say, what if we're 50% chance of getting shot to leave the house? Fair, that would be a hellish dystopia, but that's hypothetical. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The tipping point isn't a number, it's a perception. We don't agree on the perception. You're looking at mass shooting. Okay. If gun deaths per year hit something like 300,000, 10 times what we have now, and if it became truly random, affecting all neighborhoods equally, not just concentrated in cities or marginalized communities, then yeah, even staunch gun rights people might blink. That's when defensive tool becomes an obviously losing gamble. But here's the problem. Here's the problem, though. If we don't act before that tipping point, everybody's going to be so fearful that nobody's going to want to give up their weapons. Right now, it is almost no story of someone successfully defending themselves with a weapon. But the only way those numbers really are going to go up if we get closer to that tipping point. So as we get closer to that tipping point, your self-defense argument is going to increase. So basically, what you're saying is society has to get substantially worse, in which case people's desire for gun ownership is going to increase. Think about it this way. The only reason some people don't want guns right now is because society isn't that terrible. So you're saying we need to allow guns to the point where society is that terrible, in which case nobody's going to want to give them up anymore? The logic of the pro-gun argument thrives in instability. The more dangerous society feels, the more valuable a gun becomes. But here's the kicker. The proliferation of guns is also contributing to that instability. So we're caught in a self-reinforcing loop where fear drives gun ownership increases the potential for violence, and violence reinforces the fear. This makes sense. It's a feedback loop masquerading as freedom. And your point, that once we hit the tipping point, it's too late to act, it's just speculation. It's human nature. You don't get people to give up something they believe is essential for their survival after they feel threatened. You do it when they feel safe, or at least when there is enough public trust to believe that safety can be achieved collectively. But in the US, the trust is gone. Without it, asking people to disarm even incrementally feels like asking them to kneel while the house burns around them. You're right about the defensive myth. Despite the NRA rhetoric, actual defensive gun use is vanishingly rare compared to gun deaths, especially suicides and accidents. The fact doesn't matter to someone who feels like they might need it one day. And the worse things get, the more people will feel like that day is coming soon. That's why the gun rights position remains so stubborn. It doesn't need society to be good to justify itself. It needs to be bad or getting worse. That's the logic you're up against. Okay, here's my other problem. I have a fundamental problem with the notion of responsible gun ownership. Take this case that just happened in Florida. The kid got the gun because his mom, a sheriff's deputy, mind you, got the weapon. So we're clearly in a situation where people aren't being responsible to begin with. And by the way, I got to make something else clear. People say most people are law-abiding gun ownership. Gun owner. Hold on. Rephrase. People say that most gun owners are law-abiding citizens. I would ask for what the proof of that actually is. And my reasoning is, how could a gun become an illegal gun without the legal owner disappearing it or letting it fall on the back of the truck or selling it out of a back alley somewhere? I don't think there's actual evidence to prove that most gun owners are responsible or acting within the law. The phrase law-abiding gun owner gets thrown around like it's armor, like it magically distinguishes the good guys from the bad guys. But as you pointed out, where exactly are these illegal guns coming from? They're not being manufactured in dark basements by crime lords. They're overwhelmingly diverted from the legal market, which means someone, somewhere along the line, often a law-abiding citizen, screwed up. Or worse, looked the other way. And when even a sheriff's deputy, someone trained and trusted with the public safety, can't secure her weapon from her own child, that's not a fringe case. That's an indictment of the entire premise that training or status equals responsibility. Because if they can't keep a gun locked up, how are we trusting the guy with a "Don't Tread on Me" bumper sticker and a basement full of ammo to do it? When most people say most gun owners are law-abiding, what they really mean is they haven't been caught yet. That's not a moral defense. That's a statistical shrug. You want actual proof of responsibility? Then let's start requiring insurance for every firearm like we do for cars. Ooh, that's a thought. Let's mandate safety training. Let's log transfers. Let's trace every firearm used in a crime back to the last legal owner. Guess what happens the moment you propose that? The so-called responsible crowd cries tyranny. You know, it's funny because in a lot of legislation, or a lot of people who try to even, my understanding is that a lot of people even try to propose looking into gun statistics or do research like the CDC to research like gun as a health problem or gun deaths as a health problem, get blocked. And here's the thing, if you were actually confident that most of your citizenry are law-abiding citizens and your society really isn't that bad, wouldn't you let them do studies like this? Like, wouldn't you want to? Okay, yeah, of course we're all good folks, right? Let's just run the study and prove that's the case. That's the giant blinking red flag nobody on the gun rights side wants to talk about. If you really believe that the vast majority of gun owners are responsible, that gun ownership makes society safer, the more guns equal more freedom, then you'd welcome the data. You'd be the first one saying, yeah, go ahead, study. Let's CDC collect all the gun inquiry and death statistics. It'll back up our case. But that's not what happens. NRA actively blocked that research. You probably heard of the Dickey Amendment passed in 1996, which didn't outright ban gun violence research, but basically made it impossible by cutting off CDC funding for anything that could be perceived as advocating for gun control. That's not confidence, that's fear. Even the CDC was recently allowed to dip its toe. Okay. Gun deaths, as it turns out, are one of the leading causes of death for children and teens in America, higher than car accidents. That alone should send shockwaves. But instead we get deflection, we get culture war nays, we get, what about Chicago?